Welcome back into CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday. Got Ben Hutchins joining me on the other side of the Zoom call here tonight. Ben, it's like week 5 for you in Ames. How are you fitting in the new city and on the beat?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, sitting there at media availability with Matt Campbell and sitting alongside media members who've been covering the Cyclones for 10, 20, even like 30 years. And it's week 5 for Ben Hutchins here in Ames, and the Cyclones are off to their best start since 1938. They're 6-0. So it's a crazy time to be in Ames, to just kind of be dropped into this environment. It's a football frenzied environment right now. Sellout crowd is kind of the norm. Another sellout crowd likely for this big UCF game. So it's certainly an exciting time to be around this Iowa State football team.
1938 was it the last time Iowa
Yeah,
State was?
yeah. Babe Ruth was coaching the Dodgers. The ballpoint pen was invented that year. What other 1938 facts do you want to know?
I'll save it to reading your article on the QCtimes.com. I gave it a quick glance earlier today, and there were quite a few really excellent nuggets there. I think the best one, I don't know if you included it in there, but the school that they beat to improve to 6-0 doesn't even have a football program anymore. It was Marquette, and
Yeah.
they weren't even known as the Golden Eagles at that point. They were like the Hilltoppers or the Golden Avalanche, depending on who you asked. Basically, it was just kind of a goofy fact I saw researching the topic earlier this week.
I'll show you I got my Cyclone fact book here and I have it open to that page. And yeah, it was, tell me if you, this is how long it's been, Ethan. A win against Denver, a win against Luther, at Nebraska. I'll throw that one in there for you. Missouri, Kansas, and Marquette and Drake was the final game in that winning streak. So talk about realignment. College football has really changed since 1938.
I don't know where Luther played in 1938, but you should look up their current stadium. It's very picturesque, very beautiful.
I'll have to do that. That's some homework. I have not seen that picture.
Yeah, Decorah, Iowa, very pretty part of the country. If you ever have to drive through Decorah, Iowa, it's not a punishment. That is one of the prettiest drives uh, in the country, maybe, and probably in the state as well. Driving up through Decorah, really great part of the state. But circle it back to Iowa State. How do they keep this run going? It seems like the running game on both sides of the ball is going to be really important this weekend. Looking at UCF and how they can kind of beat you on the ground, what's the keys for the Cyclones to stop that ground game this weekend?
It is going to be the important thing for Saturday. UCF's bringing the number one rushing game in the Big 12, and they average 268 yards on the ground per game. So we asked Bo Frailer, the defensive back, this week at media availability, how do you do that? How do you stop a UCF running game that's very multiple, has a quarterback, two running backs that can run? Bo emphasized eye discipline. You got to know what's in front of you, recognize it, so you can be able to react and go hit a hole and tackle a guy. And you also have to have gap discipline. You can't get too aggressive chasing guys around. You got to stay together as a unit and really tackle with all 11 guys. So those are going to be the things Iowa State is trying to do to stop RJ Harvey, the senior running back who's averaging over 6.4 yards a carry. I saw him last year in a game against Oklahoma State when I covered the Cowboys, Ethan, and RJ Harvey's impressive. He has breakaway speed and was certainly a takeaway from that one.
And then I'm imagining it's probably a lot of the similar discussion when you talk to a member of the Golden Knights defense. Not that you have, but for the journalists down in Orlando, talking to them, I'm sure it's very similar because you're talking about a super versatile backfield in Iowa, in the Cyclones. I mean, Rocco maybe isn't necessarily as much of a dual threat, but he can certainly get some yards with his legs. Who's going to lead the backfield this weekend? I feel like we've had a different guy every week for the Cyclones that's kind of stood out. Maybe Action Jackson a couple of weeks in a row, but look, coming into this game, who do you think is going to be leading the backfield?
Man, you've really been listening to some Tim Brando. You like that Action Jackson
I
nickname.
do like that
Um,
Action Jackson.
I like the nickname too. I don't think Brando was too impressive to many Cyclone fans watching. I saw some people complaining about that on social media, but that's what social media is for. Yeah, you asked me who's going to lead the running backs this week, and I wish I knew, right? I do think it's the hot hand approach that we talked about last week. It was Carson Hansen, I thought that Jalen Jackson had kind of had some momentum before that. I'd say Jackson was the leader in the 3 prior games. Who knows? We could maybe see Abu Salma hop in there. I don't think that's as likely. The guys I'm looking at are Jackson and are Carson Hansen. Heck, just because he did it last week, I'll throw it to Carson Hansen. He ran really well.
Like I've mentioned a couple of times on the show, the lasting memory for me in the ground game in Ames is Abu Sama's big game against Kansas State last year. What about your feel for the backfield has you thinking that maybe Abu Sama's maybe not necessarily in it at this moment?
It's so weird, Ethan, because Abu got the start last week. He got like the first 2 carries on the drive, and he's kind of had that starting role, if you will, for a lot of these games. Um, but he hasn't been the leader in touches. At the end of the box score, you look and it's kind of Hansen and Jackson well above Sama. So I'm not really sure exactly what's going on there. He looks good when he gets touches, just not as good as the other 2. So I think that might be some of it. Maybe some of it's trying to save Sama for some freshness down later in the season if you are anticipating going to a playoff or going to a bowl game where you want to have 3 guys. So I'm not really sure what is the differentiator there, except maybe what goes on in practice behind closed doors. That's what Campbell said when asked about it this week. Is he just lets practice determine it, which isn't something we see any week, but we'll have to believe that that's how Campbell's making that decision.
One thing I think about when I hear you spitting all these names at me is the comment where it's like if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks because if you have multiple options, it can be tough to choose, and it might lead to all these negative side effects. And I can kind of see some of that bleeding over to this versatile skill position I guess treasure trove that they have in Ames right now, where it's like, who do I go to in really pressure cooker situations? In times where I need a first down, where do I go? I can think of Mr. Consistency, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Knoll can make a big play whenever he needs. And then you mentioned all these running backs who have differing skill sets. It's kind of like, man, third and long, who do I go to? Third and short, who do I go to? And then Rocco, you want Rocco to have the ball in his hands all the time. Thinking about all those situations in the skill position players that you've mentioned, where does this team turn to? Who are the playmakers that they go to in those situations? I didn't even mention Ben Brahmer, who is an exceptional tight end that I know that the Cyclones like because they talked about him a ton last year when he was a true freshman. Who does this team turn to in those crunch time situations?
Yeah, and they still like Brummer. Let me tell you that. He gets brought up almost independently. It feels like every press conference with Campbell. But Ethan, I think the third down versatility has been kind of an underrated strength of this Cyclone team. That maybe isn't something that jumps off the page or glaring, but on third down, I think it really stresses opponents out with the variety of options they go to. And last week, we saw a couple new options on third down. Eli Green, the transfer from North Dakota State, he got a big out route from Rocco Becht when the game was just 1 score, and that was a big catch for a guy we hadn't really seen a whole lot of since the opener. And then they go back to him for another first down. So Eli Green got involved. That's just another guy you can throw out there. And the other unique thing the Cyclones did last week is they let Rocco kind of run for it down there. Again, backed up, that's when the third down situation gets even more intense. And Rocco picked up 2 third downs with his legs. Both of the times he got just enough. He wasn't running away from guys, but he did make guys miss and kind of lunge forward and get those first downs. So you throw in on top of, the ever consistent Jaden Higgins, the, Jalen Knoll, Brahmer. Cyclones have a lot of ways they can get a third down converted. And I think that wouldn't be something I want to see if I was an opponent.
Now, I forgot to ask on Sunday, and I was kind of watching the game, but I was also playing college football 25 at the same time. So like maybe didn't have my entire attention. I'm trying to win a national championship. So did Mr. Consistency, did he continue the streak on Sunday or Saturday?
He did not, Ethan. It got broken. Jaden Higgins did not get in the end zone. 7 straight touchdowns for him, which was already a program record. He already had the program record set, but it did not get advanced to 8. He was over 100 yards, if that's any, silver lining for Jaden. But yeah, the streak was snapped. How about that?
Well, I was thinking about it because I think they went to him on a third down in the first quarter, and he had a big play down the sidelines. I know he had a big play down the sidelines. I can't remember what down and distance it was. And I was like, oh, there's Mr. Consistency. And then I went back to playing the game, and I was like, I'm sure Ben's gonna have something to tell me about Jaden Higgins on Sunday. But and then I was thinking back to it on Monday. I was like, I don't think we got a Mr. Consistency name drop or mention on the show. So I had to come back, I had to circle back and get some continued coverage on the record breaker, I guess.
Yeah, believe me, I would have told you if he had gotten another touchdown.
Is
Um,
is this is this officially a Jaden Higgins fan podcast? Is this the do we have president of the Jaden Higgins fan club on the show today?
well, I will say I'm a fan of him as a person. I've really enjoyed talking to him every time. I was listening to the Coach's Corner, CyHawk Talk podcast with Matt Campbell and AD Jamie Pollard, a variety of guys. I was listening to that today, and they kind of brought up how Jaden Higgins has such a life to him. Every single time you see him, he has a smile. So I have enjoyed every conversation I've had with him as a person. It's been enjoyable. So I do like Jaden in that respect for sure.
A glowing recommendation, I would say, but not
Yeah,
necessarily
yeah,
not
and as
necessarily a
a
fan club presidency statement.
well, and that's just tough to say, like a fan club, But I think he's definitely an underrated football player. Someone that, as someone who was outside of Iowa State coming into this season, you know about Jalen Noel, and you don't hear as much about this 1A, who's kind of like maybe the one at times is how I would describe Higgins. So someone who might not get as much national attention or national respect that I think is certainly deserving of that.
You have any additional thoughts before we get into the Hawkeyes talk of our CyHawk Talk show today?
Another night game. Feels like Iowa State's starting to get maybe some national respect. No more Tim Brando. I think this one's going to be on FS1 for a lot of Happy Cyclone fans. But another night game. It'll be blackout jerseys. I don't know if it's going to be an official blackout. Sounds like fans might kind of want to do an unofficial blackout of Jack Trice Stadium drone show. It really feels like things are rolling right now in Ames.
It's another night game for the Cyclones. It's another road game for the Hawkeyes this weekend. For the third time in 4 conference games, the Hawkeyes are on the road. Kind of seems like we can't get any games at Kinnick at this point. I'm sure they'll be happy to get a couple of games in a row at home coming up the next 2 weeks with Northwestern and Wisconsin coming to Iowa City. But for now, got to get through East Lansing, where they haven't won since 2012. Looking ahead at this game, I think the biggest thing for me is how do the Hawkeyes make more out of their turnovers? They're top 20 defensively in the country in forcing turnovers. They're averaging 1.8 turnovers per game. But when they get those turnovers, the offense is struggling to turn those turnovers into points. And I kind of went on a little micro rant on Twitter on Saturday during the game. I went and tracked the stats as best I could. Not something that I found in any like database or anything anywhere. I just like brute forced the stat myself and went and counted it up and tallied it up. And through 6 games, I was forced 11 turnovers. And from those 11 turnovers, they've scored 26 points. So they're averaging 2.4 points per turnover. I talked about it on the show on Sunday, and it's like really something that's bothering me because you're averaging less than a field goal per turnover. And then if you subtract the 3 points off 3 turnovers against Illinois State, and it's 2.3 points per turnover against FBS opponents, and it's like that isn't good enough. You're averaging you've turned 7 turnovers into 16 points. It's just not good enough because when you're playing complementary football like Kirk Ferentz likes to talk about, you need to score off of turnovers. That's like the biggest part of complementary football, in my opinion, is the defense gets a big stop. You're getting good field position. You need to turn that into a touchdown. And Iowa failed to do that on Saturday. It didn't kill them. And actually, I would argue it turned the game for them when they got that fumble from Aaron Graves and turned it into 3 points. They kind of rolled after that. But I want to see the Hawkeyes churn multiple turnovers into touchdowns, and they have the opportunity to do it when you think about who's under center for Michigan State. Ben, do you have any idea how many turnovers Michigan State quarterback Aiden Childs is responsible for so far this year?
Oh gosh. If say he's Michigan State's played 6 games, I'll be generous. Maybe I'll give him 12, 2 a game.
You're close. He's at
Okay.
15.
Okay.
8 interceptions, 7 fumbles. So he's very turnover prone. He's dangerous. They're very aware of his dual threat ability and his ability to make guys miss, extend plays. But just as dangerous as he is with the ball in his hands for opposing defenses, he's also been very dangerous for the Michigan State offense in terms of how many turnovers he's responsible for. And so I think this is going to be a game where Iowa's offense might have 3 or 4 opportunities to score touchdowns off of turnovers. And so I think this is going to be an excellent opportunity to practice, complementary football and turning those into points. So I think that's probably my number one thing that I'm watching for on Saturday. Well, when I'm sitting in the press box at Spartan Stadium.
Yeah. And I think, Ethan, that's such an important point, the 2.7 just not being good enough. When you consider getting to turnovers, getting decent field position, and just the psychological aspect of not picking up your offense and picking up your defense is so important. You're going up to Michigan, to East Lansing for this game. There's a little bit of a connection between these two states and programs. What did you find there this week?
Well, if you look at the Hawkeyes roster, there's 6 guys who are originally from Michigan. And then you add in Cade McNamara, who transferred in from Michigan. And there's 7 guys with at least ties to the state. Uh, and so it's just kind of interesting to watch because maybe not necessarily a pipeline you're used to seeing, especially at Iowa. Michigan not necessarily known to be a recruiting hotbed like an Ohio or a Florida or like a Southern California might be. But we asked Coach Ferentz about this on Tuesday, and he highlighted Desmond King, the cornerback who came in and had a lot of success at Iowa, went on to have an NFL career. He was from Detroit, and he kind of set the standard and set the path for other guys to come in. And Coach Ferentz said, when you have a guy come in from a state or a location and have success, other guys can see themselves in that player and having success there. So it kind of opens the door to that pipeline. And he also mentioned that defensive coordinator Phil Parker, who played at Michigan State, has been really good at recruiting the state of Michigan, kind of finding his own guys, not necessarily being a follower in the recruiting space where one team offers a guy and then you offer him because, oh, we should be recruiting the same caliber of player as a Michigan State or a Minnesota or whatever. Instead, Phil Parker's really been a trailblazer, and he again used Desmond King in this example as a guy who they didn't originally go to Michigan to recruit Desmond King. They went for another player, and it was just kind of last minute. Phil Parker got Kirk Ferentz set up to leave Michigan. He's like, hey, I'm going to go look at this other player real quick. They ended up not getting the player they originally went to Michigan for, but they landed Desmond King, and he turned into a superstar for the Hawkeyes. So it's just kind of interesting to see this connection where you might not necessarily normally see it, and have it be one that is incredibly successful. Two of the big names that Hawkeye fans are familiar with are Cohen Ettringer and backup quarterback Brendan Sullivan. Both of them are from Michigan. One that I hope you're familiar with after Friday is Hayden Large, the fullback / tight end. I'm going to have a story come out about him and kind of how he ended up at Iowa from his high school in Michigan. He went to a small school, Unity Christian, just outside of Grand Rapids. He's about an hour from East Lansing, so this is going to be a homecoming game for him. And his path, his route to Iowa is really unique. And he himself said, I'm not quite sure how I ended up here or what prompted LeVar Woods to offer me a spot here, but he did, and I'm eternally grateful. And Coach Ferentz said something similar where he said, I'm not really quite sure how he ended up in my office 2 Decembers ago, but we're happy to have him, and he's been a great addition to the team. So you can read more about Hayden Large's journey on Friday morning. But I just wanted to touch on the Michigan connection and how unique that is, in addition to promoting the story.
Of course, everyone be sure to go check that out. And my favorite thing about Hayden Large is his, first team all college football name team, right? You can't get better than that as a college football player.
I'm glad you mentioned the name because there are some interesting facts about his name. That's where I start in the story. So if you want to know exactly how well that name fits, you're gonna have to check out at least the first 6 paragraphs of the story.
Ethan, we're well into Big Ten play, and it's been around forever. Kind of we know at this point what Big Ten football is, how to get through it, how to navigate it. Where is Iowa amid all that this season, and where do you kind of see it going?
Yeah, I think there's some eternal principles of winning in the Big Ten, and it's another story that I'm tracking down as we speak, and I think it's going to be one that fans find really interesting. But it's also something that Coach Ferentz has said for a long time, and that's playing solid defense, being solid on special teams, and running the football effectively is going to be what wins in the Big Ten. And I kind of started. This story started percolating in my mind the Ohio State weekend because I chatted with you about what it takes to beat Ohio State on the road, and it was an effective ground game and turning the ball over. And it's kind of like, well, I don't know if that's unique to Ohio State or if it's just how you win in the Big Ten. And I'm kind of learning that it is how you win in the Big Ten. And if you go back and look at some of the previous Hawkeye teams that maybe struggled to win, they were still able to pull out victories when they ran the ball and played solid defense. I went back and I found one of those teams that wasn't as successful. I tracked down a member of that team and we chatted, and he sees a lot of similarities with that with his team and the current team, even though the current team is experiencing significantly more success than his team. So I think that's going to be an interesting story about how running the football and kind of the way that Coach Ferentz continues to stand by and remain consistent and steadfast in his commitment to the ground game and solid defense has led to a lot of success. And he just won game number 200 at Iowa. So he's clearly a proven winner. And the former player I spoke with went as far as to call him the dean of college football. So I think that that's what's going to be the formula this weekend is ground game, solid defense. But we'll get into that next with our Sunday's headlines today, where Ben and I will predict what happens in each game on Saturday right after this. And we're back here on CyHawk Talk doing our Sunday's headlines today. We started the show with Ben, so we'll go back to him for his headlines. Ben, what do you got for us?
First headline from Iowa State and UCF is Knights Golden no more. I think the golden shine off of these Knights is going to kind of get washed away. They've had some big, dramatic wins, and recently they've lost 3 in a row. And I think some of that polish, some of that shine is starting to wear off. And of course, they're just the Knights now, no longer the Golden Knights. I was doing some research. They dropped Golden in 2007. I would have thought it had been around a lot longer. So I think the Knights are golden no more. And my second headline is rocking on. Rocking on. The Cyclones are number 9 in the nation, 6-0 for the first time since 1938. Cyclone fans, probably not, but you might be tired of hearing that just because they have been on such a roll this season. And I think Rocco Becht is the reason that the Cyclones stay on a roll. UCF, they have a good rushing attack and stuff, but I think they're vulnerable in their passing game. Shedeur Sanders had a huge game. Josh Hoover had a huge game against these better quarterbacks that the Knights have played against. They haven't been able to stop them. So I think Rocco Becht definitely slides into that category. And I'm throwing it back to my final headline, the Roaring 30s. I might be off a decade if my history serves me there, but I think we got to throw back to 1938. And it was a party then when the Cyclones started out 7-0 with wins over Lamar and wins over Drake. And I think it'll be another celebratory mood in the Cyclone locker room this week with the win against UCF. What are your headlines, Ethan?
Talking about party and talking about throwing it back. Party like it's the end of the world. The last time the Hawkeyes beat Michigan State in East Lansing, it was 2012, famously the end of the world that year.
Nice.
So party like it's the end of the world. I think the Hawkeyes pull out the victory over Michigan State, and it's the first win in Spartan Stadium since 2012. It can't get much simpler than that. The number 2 is K2 continues climbing. K2 is what the team's nickname for Caleb Johnson is. K2 also kind of the nickname for Mount Kilimanjaro. You climb mountains. K2 continues climbing. I think Caleb Johnson's going to post another standout performance. Like I said earlier, you win on the road in the Big Ten by running the football. Caleb Johnson's been running the football like crazy. This one seems pretty easy to predict. And then the last one, carry on. Hawkeyes playoff hopes remain alive, or as I have in the document, alive, since I dropped the E there. But again, carry on. Caleb Johnson's kind of, he's getting all these carries. He's taking them to victory. And I think that's going to continue to be the formula as the Hawkeyes continue keeping those dim playoff hopes from being fully extinguished with a third loss. Those are my three headlines. Ben, have I upped my headline game? Am I on your level yet?
I was gonna say maybe this week you got me, Ethan, in our weekly battle of headlines. I really like the K2 one. I'm a sucker for a good mountain geography reference, and that was a good one. That sounds like a Jeopardy question, which always has me fired up.
We need to get like a belt where one of us can have like the headline belt for the day, and we can spend a bunch of money in postage sending it between Ames and Iowa City.
I mean, they do it with fantasy football trophies. Why not with the headline battle contest?
Well, as everyone tunes out, as two dudes start talking about their fantasy football teams, we'll say see ya on Sunday. We'll hit you guys with the Sunday Rewind show. Thanks for watching CyHawk Talk. Like I said, we'll be back on Sunday. Like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.